order to understand the medieval world, one must set aside modern assumptions about information, evidence, and authority. For most people living between the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the early modern period, knowledge did not arrive through verification, cross-checking, or debate. It arrived through tradition, rumor, religious interpretation, and repetition. In this environment, conspiracy theories were not fringe ideas. They were often the default explanation for uncertainty. The medieval mind existed in a world filled with invisible forces. Gods will govern all things, but so too did demons, spirits, curses, and hidden enemies. When crops failed, when illness spread, when political order collapsed, people searched for intentional causes. Randomness was deeply unsettling. Meaning, even dark meaning, was preferable. One of the most persistent medieval conspiracy beliefs was that catastrophes were not natural events but orchestrated acts of sabotage. Famine, plague, and mass death were frequently attributed to secret groups working behind the scenes. In towns and villages across Europe, whispers circulated that wells had been poisoned, that travelers carried hidden corruption, or that outsiders served darker powers. These beliefs did not emerge from ignorance alone. They were shaped by structural conditions. Literacy rates were low, but memory culture was strong. Stories traveled orally and evolved as they moved. A single accusation could spread across regions within weeks, reshaped by fear and local politics. Religion played a complex role. The church was the primary source of moral authority and education, but it also framed history as a cosmic struggle between good and evil. This worldview encouraged people to interpret events symbolically. If something terrible occurred, it was not merely unfortunate. It was a sign. Medieval sermons frequently warned of hidden enemies within society. These warnings were not always specific, but they reinforced the idea that danger was concealed and moral failure contagious. In such an atmosphere, suspicion became a survival instinct. Another widespread belief involved secret knowledge. Alchemists, scholars, and physicians were often suspected of knowing more than they revealed. While many were respected, others were feared. The line between learning and sorcery was thin. When outcomes could not be easily explained, knowledge itself became suspicious. Political conspiracies were equally common. Kings and nobles were believed to rule not only through visible power but through secret alliances, poisoned letters, and hidden oaths. Court politics were opaque to the common population, and this opacity encouraged speculation. When laws changed or taxes increased, people assumed manipulation rather than policy. Importantly, medieval conspiracy thinking was not irrational by contemporary standards. Information traveled slowly. Official explanations were inconsistent. Authorities contradicted one another. Trust was local, not institutional. In such a system, believing that someone somewhere was responsible often felt logical. The Black Death intensified these patterns dramatically. As the plague spread across Europe, killing millions, the absence of medical understanding created a vacuum. That vacuum was quickly filled by explanation. Some blamed celestial alignments. Others accused minority communities. Still others believed the plague was a deliberate punishment, targeted rather than universal. These beliefs had consequences. Fear justified violence, exclusion, and harsh laws. Entire communities were destroyed not by disease, but by suspicion. Conspiracy thinking, once embedded, shaped policy as much as rumor. Yet, it is essential to recognize that medieval people were not uniquely prone to misinformation. They lived in a world without standardized education, without scientific consensus, and without rapid correction of false claims. Their explanations reflected the tools available to them. As the late medieval period progressed, bureaucratic states began to emerge. Written records increased. Universities expanded. Slowly, explanations shifted from hidden enemies to systemic causes. But conspiracy thinking did not disappear. It adapted. The medieval world reminds us that belief systems are shaped less by intelligence than by structure. When information is scarce, trust is fragile, and fear is constant, hidden explanations feel safer than chaos. In studying medieval conspiracy theories, we are not observing a primitive past. We are observing a human response to uncertainty, one that continues in different forms into the present. And in that sense, the Middle Ages are not as distant as they seem. The persistence of conspiracy thinking in the medieval world was also reinforced by how authority functioned. Power was personal rather than institutional. Kings ruled by divine right, bishops by spiritual legitimacy, and local lords by inherited privilege. When authority is embodied in individuals rather than systems, explanations naturally focus on intent rather than process. If a ruler failed, it was not assumed that structures were flawed. It was assumed that someone had betrayed their duty, acted in secret, or fallen under corrupt influence. Medieval chronicles frequently reflect this mindset. Political upheaval is rarely described as the result of economic pressure or administrative failure. Instead, it is framed as treachery, deception, or moral decay. Written history itself contributed to this pattern. Medieval chroniclers did not see their role as neutral recorders. They were moral interpreters. Events were selected, shaped, and explained to reinforce lessons about virtue and sin. When disasters occurred, they were recorded not as accidents but as consequences. This narrative style trained readers and listeners to seek hidden causes. Rumor was another powerful force. In the absence of rapid communication, information traveled slowly and unevenly. A message could pass through dozens of retellings before reaching its destination. Each retelling adjusted details to fit local fears and expectations. Over time, rumor hardened into belief. Importantly, medieval conspiracy theories were rarely isolated ideas. They formed interconnected systems of explanation. A belief about poisoned wells might be linked to a belief about moral corruption, which in turn connected to fears about divine punishment. Once accepted, these systems were self-reinforcing. Contradictory evidence did not weaken them. It was absorbed and reinterpreted. Education, where it existed, did not necessarily challenge this worldview. Medieval universities focused on theology, philosophy, and classical texts. Debate was structured, but its boundaries were fixed. Knowledge was something to be reconciled with authority, not tested against observation. This limited the development of alternative explanations for large-scale events. Yet skepticism did exist. Some physicians questioned popular explanations for disease. Some theologians cautioned against rash accusations. Some rulers attempted to suppress rumor when it threatened stability. These voices, however, were often drowned out by fear and social pressure. The social cost of rejecting conspiracy beliefs could be high. To deny a widely held explanation was to risk appearing immoral, disloyal, or spiritually blind. In tightly knit communities, conformity mattered. Belief was as much a social obligation as an intellectual position. As Europe moved toward the late Middle Ages, economic and demographic shifts slowly altered these dynamics. Trade expanded. Cities grew. Record-keeping improved. Exposure to different cultures introduced competing explanations for the same phenomena. These changes did not eliminate conspiracy thinking, but they complicated it. The transition was uneven. In some regions, belief systems hardened under pressure. In others, they softened. What changed most was not belief itself, but the range of acceptable explanations. Gradually, intent-based explanations began to share space with structural ones. By the early modern period, conspiracy theories did not disappear. They transformed. Instead of secret poisoners and divine signs, people increasingly feared hidden political factions, economic manipulation, and ideological enemies. The underlying pattern remained the same. When complexity overwhelms understanding, the mind seeks agency. Studying medieval conspiracy theories, therefore, offers more than historical curiosity. It provides insight into how humans respond to uncertainty when reliable information is scarce and trust is fragile. The Middle Ages show us that conspiracy thinking flourishes not because people are foolish, but because explanation feels necessary. In that world, as in many others, believing that someone was in control, even maliciously, felt safer than accepting that suffering could occur without intention. And it is precisely this desire for meaning, rather than ignorance, that made medieval conspiracy theories so enduring. They were not marginal ideas. They were woven into the fabric of everyday understanding, shaping how people interpreted their world, judged one another, and responded to crisis. In the end, the medieval experience reminds us that belief systems are mirrors. They reflect the conditions in which people live, the information they receive, and the fears they cannot resolve. The Middle Ages were an age of faith, hierarchy, and uncertainty. Their conspiracies were the intellectual shadows cast by those realities. And those shadows, long after the medieval world faded, continued to follow humanity forward. The endurance of these patterns becomes even clearer when examining how medieval societies responded to moments of transition. Periods of change were especially fertile ground for conspiracy thinking. When familiar structures weakened, suspicion intensified. Stability reduced the need for hidden explanations, but instability demanded them. Wars, successions, and religious disputes repeatedly triggered waves of rumor. When a king died unexpectedly, speculation followed immediately. Poison was often suspected before illness. When treaties failed, betrayal was assumed rather than miscalculation. In a world where political decisions were made behind closed doors, secrecy itself became proof of conspiracy. The medieval understanding of causation was deeply moralized. Actions were judged not only by outcome, but by intention. Because intention could not be observed, it had to be inferred. This inference often relied on reputation, prejudice, and existing fears. Once a group or individual was associated with danger, evidence was no longer required to sustain suspicion. This dynamic was especially visible in times of crisis. During prolonged famines, communities searched for deliberate wrongdoing. Natural explanations, such as weather patterns or soil exhaustion, offered little emotional relief. Blame, however unjust, created clarity. It defined an enemy and restored a sense of control. Language itself reinforced this mindset. Medieval legal and religious vocabulary emphasized guilt, corruption, and contamination. These terms blurred the boundary between physical harm and moral failure. Disease could be sinful. Misfortune could be deserved. Conspiracy theories thrived in this ambiguity. The role of visual culture should not be underestimated. Manuscript illustrations, church murals, and symbolic imagery communicated ideas to populations that could not read. These images often depicted abstract forces as human figures. Demons whispering, sinners conspiring, enemies lurking in shadow. Such representations train viewers to imagine danger as intentional and concealed. Over time, repeated exposure to these images normalized suspicion. The idea that threats were hidden became part of collective intuition. Even without specific accusations, people learned to expect unseen forces at work. It is also important to recognize that medieval conspiracy theories were not always incorrect in their basic assumptions. Power was frequently abused. Alliances were often secret. Poisoning did occur. Deception was a genuine political tool. The difficulty lay not in identifying that conspiracies existed, but in distinguishing real ones from imagined ones. Without investigative institutions, this distinction was nearly impossible to maintain. Accusation and proof were easily conflated. A convincing story could outweigh contradictory evidence, especially if it aligned with prevailing fears. As centuries passed, the accumulation of such beliefs shaped long-term attitudes toward authority. Distrust became embedded. Rulers were expected to deceive. Elites were assumed to conceal knowledge. Transparency was not anticipated. It was considered unlikely. This expectation altered how people interpreted reform and innovation. New laws, unfamiliar technologies, or foreign ideas were often met with suspicion. Change itself became suspect. The belief that transformation concealed malicious intent slowed adaptation and reinforced traditional explanations. Yet medieval societies were not static. Gradual shifts in record-keeping, commerce, and education slowly expanded the range of explanations available. Merchant networks brought news from distant regions. Legal systems began to document proceedings more systematically. These developments introduced competing narratives that challenged rumor-based thinking. Still, the emotional appeal of conspiracy explanations remained strong. They provided coherence in a world where life was precarious and suffering common. They transformed randomness into narrative and fear into purpose. By the close of the medieval period, Europe stood at a threshold. Old belief systems had not disappeared, but they were no longer uncontested. New ways of understanding causation began to emerge alongside traditional ones. The result was not clarity, but tension. This tension defined the transition into the modern world. Conspiracy thinking did not vanish with increased literacy or scientific inquiry. It adapted, shifting focus from divine punishment to political manipulation, from demons to factions, from moral corruption to ideological threat. What changed was the language, not the impulse. The medieval legacy, therefore, is not one of ignorance overcome, but of human continuity. The same cognitive instincts that shaped belief in poisoned wells and secret enemies continue to operate wherever uncertainty exceeds understanding. To study medieval conspiracy theories is to study the human need for explanation under pressure. It is to recognize that belief is shaped as much by fear and structure as by evidence. And it is to accept that history does not progress in straight lines. It circles, revisits, and reinterprets the same anxieties under new conditions. The Middle Ages remind us that when information is scarce, trust fragile, and fear persistent, hidden explanations will always find fertile ground. They always have. They always will. The social mechanisms that sustained medieval conspiracy beliefs were subtle but powerful. They operated through repetition rather than enforcement. A story told often enough did not require proof. Familiarity itself became validation. Over generations, Certain explanations were inherited alongside customs, prayers, and local traditions. Children learned not only what to believe but how to believe. They absorbed caution toward strangers, reverence toward authority, and suspicion toward deviation. These lessons were rarely explicit. They were conveyed through example, warning, and consequence. A neighbor accused, a traveler avoided, a rumor punished. Belief was shaped by observation. Communal memory played a central role. Past crises were recalled selectively, framed to support existing interpretations. A famine remembered as divine punishment reinforced moral explanations for future hardship. A revolt remembered as betrayal validated suspicion toward political change. Memory was not archival, it was instructional. This process ensured continuity. Even as circumstances evolved, explanatory frameworks remained stable. New events were fitted into old patterns. This stability offered psychological comfort, even when it perpetuated fear. Silence also mattered. Many who doubted popular explanations chose not to speak. The cost of dissent could be isolation or accusation. Over time, silence created the illusion of consensus. Beliefs appeared universal because alternatives were invisible. This dynamic is evident in medieval legal records. Accusations often outnumbered defenses. Confessions were recorded. Doubts were not. The historical record, shaped by authority, amplifies belief more than skepticism. As a result, conspiracy thinking appears more uniform than it may have been. Yet even within this structure, belief was rarely absolute. People navigated uncertainty pragmatically. A rumor might be believed emotionally while questioned privately. Contradiction did not always provoke crisis. Humans are capable of holding uncertainty alongside belief, especially when survival demands flexibility. The medieval world was not governed solely by fear. It was also sustained by cooperation, trust within kinship networks, and shared purpose. Conspiracy thinking existed alongside charity, ritual, and mutual dependence. It did not define every interaction. It emerged most strongly when stress disrupted balance. Understanding this nuance is essential. Medieval people were neither naive nor perpetually paranoid. They responded rationally to the limits of their environment. Their explanations reflect the constraints under which they lived. As historians, the task is not to judge these beliefs, but to contextualize them. To see conspiracy theories not as errors, but as adaptations. They were cognitive tools, imperfect but functional, shaped by necessity rather than fantasy. When we listen to medieval explanations with patience rather than superiority, a clearer picture emerges. The Middle Ages were not defined by darkness, but by uncertainty. And uncertainty demands interpretation. In every era, societies develop narratives that make the world legible. In the medieval period, those narratives were infused with faith, morality, and intention. They answered questions that had no measurable answers. Why did this happen? Who is responsible? What does it mean? Conspiracy theories offered responses when other explanations were unavailable. They were not always comforting, but they were coherent. They transformed chaos into structure. As the modern world developed new tools for understanding, some of these narratives lost authority. Others persisted, reshaped by new language and new fears. The medieval contribution lies not in specific beliefs, but in the enduring pattern they reveal. History shows us that when explanation lags behind experience, belief fills the gap. When trust erodes, suspicion grows. When fear dominates, hidden enemies become plausible. The Middle Ages provide one of the clearest illustrations of this cycle, preserved in chronicles, sermons, laws, and stories. They allow us to observe the anatomy of conspiracy thinking before the arrival of mass media, before rapid communication, before global systems. What we see is not an anomaly. We see ourselves operating under different constraints. And that recognition is perhaps the most valuable insight medieval history can offer. There is a final dimension to medieval conspiracy thinking that deserves careful attention: the role of fear as a stabilizing force. While fear is often viewed as disruptive, in the medieval world it also functioned as a means of order. Fear reinforced boundaries, encouraged conformity, and discouraged behaviors perceived as dangerous to the community. Conspiracy beliefs often served this stabilizing role. By defining what was forbidden, suspicious, or morally corrupt, they helped communities draw lines around acceptable conduct. In this sense, conspiracy theories were not only explanations of misfortune, but tools of social regulation. A person accused of secret wrongdoing became a warning rather than merely an individual. Their story circulated as instruction. It reminded others of the consequences of deviation, curiosity, or isolation. Whether the accusation was true mattered less than the lesson it conveyed. This mechanism helped maintain cohesion in small, vulnerable populations. When survival depended on cooperation, behaviors that threatened unity were feared intensely. Conspiracy thinking provided a framework to identify and suppress those threats, even at great cost. At the same time, this framework limited empathy. Once someone was placed outside the moral boundary, their suffering could be justified. Harm inflicted in the name of protection felt necessary rather than cruel. This moral distancing is a recurring feature of conspiracy-driven fear across history. Yet medieval people were not unaware of this danger. Religious texts warned against false accusation. Legal traditions emphasized testimony and oath. Moral teaching stressed restraint. These counterweights existed, but they were fragile. In moments of crisis, fear often overpowered caution. The medieval experience shows us how easily balance can tip. When explanation, authority, and trust align, belief stabilizes. When they fracture, suspicion rushes in to fill the space. By tracing these dynamics across centuries, historians gain more than factual knowledge. They gain perspective on the conditions that produce certain kinds of thinking. The Middle Ages become a laboratory for understanding belief under pressure. What emerges is a pattern that transcends time. Conspiracy theories do not require ignorance. They require uncertainty. They flourish where answers are incomplete and stakes are high. The medieval world was rich in uncertainty. Life expectancy was short. Disease was unpredictable. Power was opaque. Knowledge was scarce. Under these conditions, the search for hidden causes was not irrational. It was inevitable. As this documentary has shown, medieval conspiracy theories were not marginal curiosities. They were woven into everyday understanding. They shaped how people interpreted illness, disaster, authority, and change. They influenced law, politics, and social relations. They justified actions that, in retrospect, appear tragic. And they endured because they addressed a fundamental human need, the need to make sense of suffering. In the quiet study of medieval belief, we are reminded that progress in knowledge does not eliminate fear. It only changes its form. The impulse to seek intentional explanations remains constant, even as the language evolves. The Middle Ages do not stand apart from modernity. They form one chapter in a continuous human story, a story defined not by the absence of reason, but by the struggle to understand a complex and often hostile world. To listen to medieval voices is not to encounter superstition alone, but to encounter humanity responding to uncertainty with the tools it possessed. And in that response, we recognize something enduring, something familiar, something profoundly human. When we step back and observe the medieval world as a whole, it becomes clear that conspiracy thinking was not an interruption of normal life. It was embedded within it. It shaped expectations long before crises occurred and influenced reactions once they did. People did not suddenly become suspicious during disaster. Suspicion had already been prepared by culture, memory, and belief. This preparation mattered. It meant that when fear arrived, it found a structure waiting for it. Explanations did not need to be invented from nothing. They were drawn from an existing reservoir of meaning. Hidden enemies, moral corruption, and secret intent were already familiar ideas. Crisis merely activated them. In this sense, medieval conspiracy theories functioned as dormant narratives. They remained in the background during stable periods, rarely questioned but not always foreground. When uncertainty increased, they moved to the center of interpretation. This observation helps explain their resilience. Beliefs that remain partially invisible are difficult to challenge. They do not announce themselves as theories. They present themselves as common sense. By the time they are noticed, they have already shaped perception. The medieval relationship between belief and authority further reinforced this invisibility. When explanations aligned with religious teaching, legal tradition, or communal memory, they acquired legitimacy without scrutiny. Doubt became unnecessary and often undesirable. At the same time, belief did not always lead to action. Many conspiracy ideas remained speculative, discussed quietly or accepted passively. It was only when fear intensified that belief translated into consequence. Understanding this distinction is important. Belief alone did not cause harm. It was belief combined with pressure. The medieval period teaches us that ideas gain power not simply through their content, but through timing. An explanation that feels harmless in calm conditions can become dangerous when circumstances change. This dynamic is one of history's most enduring lessons. As historians reconstruct medieval belief systems, they encounter not a single worldview, but layers of interpretation overlapping and interacting. Faith, rumor, authority, and experience formed a complex web. Within that web, conspiracy thinking was not dominant, but it was always available. Its availability mattered. It shaped the boundaries of imagination. It influenced which explanations felt plausible and which felt absurd. Over time, these boundaries became habits of thought. Habits are powerful. They guide interpretation before conscious reasoning begins. In the medieval world, habits of suspicion were cultivated gradually, reinforced subtly, and rarely named explicitly. They became part of how the world was understood. This understanding did not vanish with the end of the Middle Ages. It was carried forward, transformed by new institutions and technologies. Printing expanded access to information, but it also expanded the reach of rumor. Bureaucracy increased documentation, but it also created new forms of secrecy. Each advance altered the surface while preserving underlying dynamics. The medieval experience reminds us that belief systems are not replaced all at once. They accumulate, adapt, and coexist. Old explanations fade slowly, often surviving within new frameworks. In this way, the Middle Ages continue to speak to us, not through isolated ideas, but through patterns of response. They show us how humans behave when explanation lags behind experience, when authority is distant, and when fear demands meaning. To study medieval conspiracy theories is therefore not to look backward in judgment, but inward in recognition. They reveal the architecture of belief under pressure. They show us how societies construct meaning when certainty is unavailable. And they remind us that history is not a record of mistakes overcome, but a record of adaptations made. The medieval world adapted to uncertainty with the tools it had. Those tools were imperfect, but they were human. And in understanding them, we better understand ourselves. In the quiet distance of centuries, it can be tempting to treat medieval belief as something finished, resolved, and safely contained within the past. Yet the deeper one listens, the more familiar the rhythms become. The Middle Ages do not speak in an alien voice. They speak in a register shaped by uncertainty, vulnerability, and the need for coherence. Conspiracy thinking in this light is not a historical curiosity. It is a recurring response to conditions that humans repeatedly encounter. Whenever information is incomplete, whenever authority feels distant or opaque, whenever fear outpaces understanding, similar patterns emerge. The medieval world offers a clear, undiluted view of this process because its constraints were stark. Life was fragile. Knowledge was uneven. Explanations carried moral weight. Under such conditions, belief became a form of orientation. It helped people locate themselves within a world that often felt hostile and unpredictable. What medieval conspiracy theories reveal is not a failure of reason, but the limits of it. Reason requires tools, trust, and time. When those are absent, other forms of explanation step in. These forms may be flawed, but they are purposeful. They answer questions that would otherwise remain unbearable. Who caused this? Why did it happen? What does it mean? These questions do not disappear simply because answers are unavailable. They demand response. The medieval world responded with the language it knew: faith, morality, intention, and hidden agency. As this documentary has explored, these responses shaped law, politics, memory, and social relations. They influenced how communities defined belonging and danger. They left marks on history not only through actions taken, but through assumptions carried forward. The value of studying these beliefs lies not in distancing ourselves from them, but in recognizing their structure. When we see how meaning was constructed in the medieval past, we gain insight into how meaning is constructed in any era. History, at its most useful, does not flatter us. It does not reassure us that we are immune to the patterns we observe. Instead, it invites humility. It reminds us that knowledge is always provisional, and understanding always incomplete. The medieval experience teaches us that belief fills gaps. It flows toward uncertainty. It adapts to fear. And once established, it resists removal not because it is irrational, but because it is functional. In the end, the Middle Ages leave us with a quiet, enduring lesson. Human beings do not live by facts alone. They live by explanations. When explanations fail, belief persists. To understand medieval conspiracy theories is therefore to understand a fundamental aspect of the human condition. Not as a flaw, but as a response. And with that understanding, we do not merely study the past. We listen to it. After the final words of a medieval chronicle were written, life continued much as it had before. Fields were worked, bells rang, disputes arose and were settled or left unresolved. Belief did not conclude with explanation. It persisted quietly, shaping choices long after the crisis that inspired it had passed. This persistence is one of the most important aspects of medieval conspiracy thinking. Beliefs did not need constant reinforcement to survive. Once absorbed into habit, they became background assumptions, influencing judgment without announcing themselves. In many communities, these assumptions determined who was trusted, who was feared, and who was listened to. They influenced marriage, trade, and governance. Over time, belief became less about specific accusations and more about orientation, how one approached uncertainty itself. The medieval world reminds us that belief systems are rarely dismantled directly. They erode slowly, often replaced not by clarity, but by alternative frameworks that feel equally coherent. One explanation gives way to another, but the underlying need remains. Even as new forms of learning emerged toward the end of the Middle Ages, older patterns continued alongside them. Faith and observation, tradition and inquiry, suspicion and trust existed together, sometimes in tension, sometimes in balance. This coexistence was not a failure of progress. It was its condition. The study of medieval conspiracy theories, therefore, does not point toward a single conclusion. It reveals a landscape of thought shaped by circumstance, reinforced by culture, and sustained by necessity. It shows us how humans adapt their understanding when certainty is out of reach. In the quiet continuity of medieval life, conspiracy thinking was not always dramatic. It was often subtle, practical, and unspoken. It lived in assumptions, in expectations, in the stories people chose to believe because those stories made sense of a difficult world. History preserves these patterns not to indict the past, but to illuminate it. When we observe medieval belief with patience, we see not darkness, but complexity. We see people negotiating meaning with limited tools, striving for coherence in the face of instability. And in that negotiation, we recognize something enduring. The medieval world did not end because its beliefs were corrected. It ended because its conditions changed. New structures reshaped how explanation functioned, but the impulse to explain did not disappear. It never does. This is why medieval history continues to matter. It does not offer us distance. It offers us perspective. It shows us how belief responds to uncertainty, how fear shapes interpretation, and how meaning is constructed when answers are incomplete. To understand this is not merely to study the Middle Ages. It is to understand how humans have always faced the unknown, and how they always will. There is a certain stillness that settles over the medieval world when one stops looking for moments of crisis and begins observing the spaces between them. Most lives were not defined by accusation or catastrophe, but by routine. And it was within this routine that belief quietly endured. People rose with the sun, worked familiar land, attended familiar rituals, and returned to familiar fears. Conspiracy thinking did not dominate every thought. It existed as a background presence, a framework ready to be activated when normal explanations failed. Its power lay precisely in this restraint. Because it was not constant, it did not exhaust itself. This quiet endurance made belief difficult to dislodge. A dramatic claim can be challenged. A habitual assumption cannot. Medieval conspiracy thinking often took the latter form. It shaped instinct rather than argument. It influenced what felt plausible before any reasoning began. In this way, belief became inherited, not taught formally but absorbed through observation. Children learned who was to be trusted not through instruction, but through silence, avoidance, and tone. A name spoken softly, a door closed slightly earlier than usual, a story repeated without emphasis. Such moments rarely enter historical records, yet they are where belief lives longest. The medieval world was sustained by continuity more than change. Customs persisted because they worked well enough. Explanations endured because they reduced anxiety, even if they increased suspicion. Few people had the luxury of demanding certainty. Survival required acceptance. This acceptance did not mean passivity. It meant adaptation. People adjusted their behavior to match their understanding of the world. They chose caution over curiosity, familiarity over novelty, consensus over dissent. These choices made sense in a fragile environment. From a distance, conspiracy thinking appears as distortion. Up close, it appears as risk management. The medieval experience teaches us that belief is often less about truth than about function. An explanation survives because it does something. It organizes fear. It assigns responsibility. It offers direction when none is obvious. When we examine medieval conspiracy theories through this lens, judgment gives way to comprehension. We see why such beliefs persisted even when they caused harm. They persisted because they solved a problem, even if imperfectly. They answered questions that could not be left unanswered. As historians, we trace these beliefs not to condemn them, but to understand the conditions that produced them. In doing so, we gain insight into how societies respond when the world feels larger than their ability to explain it. The medieval world faced that imbalance constantly. Nature was unpredictable. Authority was distant. Knowledge was fragmented. Under these conditions, belief became architecture. It held understanding together when certainty was unavailable. This architecture was not designed. It emerged, layer by layer, story by story, assumption by assumption. Once built, it shaped every movement within it. And when the medieval world slowly transformed, that architecture did not collapse. It was renovated. Old walls were repurposed. New explanations were built upon familiar foundations. History rarely clears the ground completely. It builds upon what already exists. In this way, the Middle Ages continue to echo forward, not as a warning, but as a record of human adaptation. They remind us that belief is not simply what people think. It is how people live with what they do not know. And that, perhaps, is the most enduring legacy of medieval conspiracy thinking. In the end, the medieval world teaches us something quiet and easily overlooked. Belief does not need certainty to survive. It needs continuity. It needs repetition. It needs a shared sense of meaning, however fragile that meaning may be. Medieval conspiracy thinking endured because it was rarely challenged directly. It lived in the margins of daily life, shaping expectations without demanding attention. It waited patiently for moments of strain, then stepped forward to explain what could not otherwise be understood. This patience gave belief its strength. Ideas that rest quietly do not provoke resistance. They become part of the landscape, like roads worn into the earth by generations of footsteps. No one remembers who chose the path. They only know where it leads. For medieval people, these paths guided interpretation. When uncertainty appeared, the direction was already set. Hidden causes felt more convincing than chance. Intent felt more acceptable than randomness. Meaning, even painful meaning, felt preferable to silence. As historians look back across centuries, what emerges is not a story of error corrected, but of navigation. People navigating fear, scarcity, and loss with the intellectual tools available to them. Conspiracy thinking was one such tool. Imperfect, dangerous at times, but deeply human. The medieval world was not waiting to be enlightened. It was responding to reality as it experienced it. And that response deserves to be understood on its own terms. When we listen closely, without urgency or judgment, the medieval past speaks with clarity. It tells us that belief is not an obstacle to history. It is one of its driving forces. Belief shapes action, memory, and identity long before facts are organized into explanation. This is why medieval conspiracy theories matter. Not because they were strange, but because they were normal. They reveal how ordinary people made sense of extraordinary uncertainty. They show us that the human need for explanation is older than institutions, older than science, older than written history itself. And as long as uncertainty remains part of the human condition, that need will endure. The Middle Ages, in their silence and complexity, leave us with this understanding that history is not only about what happened, but about how it was understood. And that understanding, however flawed, shaped the world that followed. To study medieval belief is to acknowledge that humans have always lived between knowledge and mystery, and they always will. There is a quiet humility that comes from recognizing how little separates the medieval world from our own. The distance of time creates the illusion of difference, but beneath that distance lie familiar patterns of thought. People then, as now, sought coherence in a world that often denied it. They lived with unanswered questions. They endured losses without explanation. They navigated systems they did not fully understand. In response, they built meanings that allowed life to continue. Medieval conspiracy thinking was part of this construction. It was not an interruption of daily life, but a way of enduring it. It softened the sharp edges of uncertainty by giving fear a shape and direction. In many cases, belief did not lead to action at all. It simply existed, quietly influencing perception. It colored how events were remembered, how stories were told, how warnings were issued to the next generation. Its influence was slow, cumulative, and subtle. This subtlety is what allowed belief to persist across centuries. Loud ideas burn out, quiet ones settle in. As night fell over medieval towns, candles extinguished one by one. The world became smaller and darker. In that darkness, explanations mattered. They filled the silence left by absence of light, absence of knowledge, absence of control. The medieval mind did not fear mystery itself. It feared meaninglessness. Conspiracy explanations, for all their flaws, resisted that emptiness. They insisted that events, however painful, were part of an intelligible order. History preserves this insistence not because it was correct, but because it was powerful. It shaped behavior, justified decisions, and influenced the course of communities and kingdoms alike. When we study these beliefs today, the goal is not to measure them against modern standards, but to understand the conditions that made them compelling. In doing so, we gain insight into the mechanics of belief itself. Belief does not require truth to function. It requires resonance. It must fit the emotional and social realities of the people who hold it. Medieval conspiracy thinking fit those realities closely. The Middle Ages, therefore, offer us more than stories of the past. They offer a mirror, reflecting how humans respond when certainty is scarce and fear demands explanation. That mirror does not accuse, it simply reveals. And in that reflection, we see that history is not a march away from misunderstanding, but a continuous negotiation with the unknown. The medieval world negotiated that unknown with faith, suspicion, and meaning. Others will negotiate it differently, but the negotiation itself remains. And so the medieval past does not close with answers. It settles instead into understanding, a quiet understanding, one that lingers. As the final echoes of medieval voices fade into silence, what remains is not a lesson delivered, but an atmosphere sustained. The Middle Ages do not insist on interpretation. They invite reflection. They ask the listener to remain with uncertainty rather than resolve it too quickly. This willingness to remain is perhaps the most difficult posture for any age. Humans are inclined toward closure. We seek conclusions, explanations, and reassurance. Medieval belief systems remind us that closure is often provisional and reassurance rarely permanent. For those who lived then, life unfolded without the promise of understanding. Answers came slowly, if at all, and yet life continued. People adapted not by eliminating uncertainty, but by accommodating it. They made room for it within their beliefs, rituals, and expectations. Conspiracy thinking in this context was not an aberration. It was one of many accommodations. It allowed people to live alongside fear without being overwhelmed by it. It provided a sense of orientation, however imperfect, in a landscape where certainty was scarce. What history records is not the success or failure of these beliefs, but their persistence. Persistence tells us what mattered. It tells us which ideas endured pressure, survived contradiction, and remained useful enough to pass on. In the medieval world, belief endured because it was woven into daily life. It did not require persuasion. It required participation. To live within a community was to share its explanations, even when privately uncertain. This shared understanding created continuity. It allowed generations to inherit not only land and language, but ways of interpreting experience. Over time, interpretation became tradition. Tradition became expectation. Expectation became instinct. And instinct is powerful. As centuries passed and the medieval world slowly transformed, many of these instincts remained. They adapted to new circumstances, expressed in new vocabularies, attached to new fears, but their underlying structure persisted. History does not erase instinct. It reshapes it. To listen carefully to medieval belief is to recognize this reshaping in motion. It is to hear how humans respond when knowledge is incomplete and trust is fragile. It is to observe how meaning is constructed not from certainty, but from need. This observation does not distance us from the past. It draws us closer. The Middle Ages do not ask to be judged. They ask to be understood. And understanding begins not with answers, but with attention. Attention to silence. Attention to repetition. Attention to what people believed not because it was proven, but because it helped them endure. In that endurance lies the true legacy of medieval conspiracy thinking. Not as error, not as ignorance, but as evidence of humanity navigating a difficult world with the tools it possessed. And as long as the world remains difficult, that navigation will continue. Quietly, endlessly. There is something fitting about ending without a clear ending. Medieval history itself rarely concludes cleanly. It recedes. It blends into what follows. Belief does not stop. Quiets, shifts, and waits. In the medieval world, waiting was familiar. People waited for seasons to turn, for illness to pass, for news to arrive, for meaning to reveal itself. Waiting shaped patience. Patience shaped belief. When answers were delayed, interpretation filled the space. This filling was not hurried. It unfolded over years, sometimes generations. An idea did not need to convince immediately. It only needed to remain present. Over time, presence became acceptance. Medieval conspiracy thinking benefited from this slowness. Without constant challenge or rapid contradiction, ideas matured quietly. They were tested not by debate, but by whether they continued to feel useful. Those that did survived. Utility, rather than accuracy, was often the measure of truth. This is not a failing unique to the medieval world. It is a human pattern. We keep the explanations that help us function. We let go of those that do not. History records this process imperfectly, but its traces remain visible. In village customs, in legal traditions, in inherited suspicion, in stories told without emphasis, yet remembered. When historians study these traces, they are not reconstructing a single belief system. They are observing layers, older explanations resting beneath newer ones, occasionally resurfacing when circumstances align. The medieval period offers a rare opportunity to see these layers exposed. Its slower pace allows us to observe belief formation without the noise of acceleration. We see ideas take root, spread, harden, and endure. This endurance is not dramatic. It is quiet, and quiet endurance is often the most influential. As the centuries passed, the medieval world did not vanish. It dissolved into what followed. Its beliefs did not disappear. They were absorbed, adapted, renamed. The language changed. The impulse did not. This is why medieval history continues to resonate. It does not feel distant because it addresses questions that have never been fully resolved. Questions about cause, responsibility, trust, and meaning. Who acts behind the scenes? Why does suffering fall unevenly? What cannot be seen, but must be accounted for? These questions did not belong only to the Middle Ages. They belong to every age that confronts uncertainty. And so the medieval world remains with us, not as a lesson delivered, but as a presence felt. A reminder that belief is not an error to be eliminated, but a response to be understood. In listening to medieval voices, we are not asked to agree with them. We are asked to recognize the conditions that shaped them. Recognition leads not to judgment, but to clarity. Clarity about how belief forms. Clarity about why it endures. Clarity about what it means to live without certainty. The Middle Ages lived there for centuries, and humanity has never fully left that place. At a certain point, explanation gives way to acceptance. The medieval world understood this intuitively. There were limits to what could be known, limits to what could be changed, and limits to what could be explained. Beyond those limits, belief did not attempt to conquer uncertainty. It learned to live beside it. This coexistence shaped medieval thought more than any single doctrine. People did not expect clarity in all things. They expected continuity. Life was endured through rhythm rather than resolution. Seasons returned. Rituals repeated. Stories circulated. Meaning was reinforced not through certainty, but through familiarity. Conspiracy thinking fit easily into this rhythm. It did not demand immediate action. It offered background coherence. It waited patiently until circumstances required it, then stepped forward to explain what otherwise felt unbearable. This patience is why such beliefs were rarely dismantled. They did not insist. They lingered, and what lingers becomes part of the environment, noticed only when absent. In medieval Europe, absence was frightening. Absence of food, absence of health, absence of authority, absence of explanation. Belief filled these absences quietly, without fanfare, without proof. As centuries passed, the world accumulated new forms of knowledge, but absence never vanished entirely. uncertainty remained, fear adapted, and belief continued to evolve alongside them. The medieval experience teaches us that belief is not something humanity outgrows. It is something humanity reshapes. Each era supplies new language, new symbols, new targets. But the underlying impulse remains constant. To look at medieval conspiracy theories, then, is not to observe a mistake corrected by progress. It is to observe a human strategy recurring under familiar conditions. The tools change. The questions persist. Why did this happen? Who is responsible? What cannot be seen, but must be accounted for? The Middle Ages answered these questions in ways that made sense within their world. Those answers shaped lives, sometimes gently, sometimes tragically. History records the outcomes, but it also preserves the logic behind them. That logic deserves to be understood without haste. When we slow down and listen, the medieval past does not shout. It murmurs. It offers no conclusions, only patterns. It shows us how belief forms when certainty falters, and how it survives by becoming ordinary. In the end, medieval conspiracy thinking was not extraordinary. It was familiar. It was part of how people endured uncertainty without being undone by it. And perhaps that is the quiet truth history leaves us with. That belief, in all its forms, is not a failure of humanity. It is one of its continuities. And as long as uncertainty remains, that continuity will remain with us. Quietly, unnoticed, waiting. There comes a moment in every long history when words begin to recede, and what remains is not explanation, but atmosphere. The medieval world reaches us most clearly in this space, where interpretation softens and presence takes its place. In that presence, belief is no longer something argued or defended. It simply exists. It exists as habit, as memory, as inherited caution. It exists in the way people orient themselves toward the unknown, long before they attempt to name it. For medieval communities, this orientation was learned slowly. It emerged from experience rather than instruction, from years shaped by uncertainty, loss, endurance, and repetition. Over time, explanation became less about accuracy and more about stability. Stability mattered. In a world where so much was unpredictable, stability offered relief. Even imperfect explanations were preferable to none at all. They gave form to anxiety. They gave boundaries to fear. Conspiracy thinking was one such form. It did not promise safety. Promised intelligibility. It suggested that events, however painful, followed a logic that could be grasped, even if only partially. This promise was enough. History does not preserve how belief felt moment to moment. It preserves outcomes, conflicts, and records. But beneath those records lies something quieter. The daily effort to make sense of life without the assurance of understanding. The medieval world lived inside that effort. Its beliefs grew from it. Its fears were shaped by it. And its explanations, however flawed, were attempts to endure it. As listeners, separated by centuries, we are not asked to accept those explanations. We are asked to recognize their purpose, to see belief not as error, but as response. When we do, the Middle Ages appear less distant. Their struggles resemble our own, even if their language differs. The need for meaning, for agency, for coherence in the face of uncertainty remains unchanged. This is why medieval history continues to resonate, especially when approached slowly. It does not overwhelm. It invites reflection. It allows us to consider how belief functions when certainty is unavailable, and how humans adapt when explanation falls short. In the end, the medieval past does not offer closure. It offers continuity, a reminder that history is not a sequence of problems solved, but a record of humans learning how to live with what cannot be fully known. And perhaps that is where this story is meant to rest. Not in conclusion, not in certainty, but in understanding. A quiet understanding, one that remains long after the words have faded. And so the medieval world settles, not into silence, but into distance. A distance that is not empty, but spacious. Within it, belief no longer presses forward. It rests. What remains is the awareness that history does not rush to explain itself. It unfolds slowly, shaped by ordinary lives responding to extraordinary uncertainty. The Middle Ages were built not only by kings and councils, but by countless moments of quiet decision, whom to trust, what to fear, which stories to believe. These moments rarely leave records, yet they form the texture of history more reliably than any decree or chronicle. They are where belief truly lived. In those spaces, conspiracy thinking was not loud or dramatic. It was cautious. It was a way of orienting oneself in a world where danger was often unseen and outcomes rarely predictable. It offered a map when the terrain was unclear. That map was imperfect. It led people astray as often as it guided them. But it was used because something was needed, not because something was proven. History asks us to notice this distinction. The medieval past does not demand our agreement. It asks for our patience. It asks us to slow down enough to see how belief forms when certainty is unavailable and fear must still be navigated. When we grant it that patience, the Middle Ages reveal a quiet truth. That belief is not an interruption of reason, but a companion to it. It walks beside understanding, especially when understanding falters. This companionship is not bound to any era. It appears wherever explanation lags behind experience, wherever systems are complex and trust incomplete, wherever human beings must act without full knowledge. The medieval world lived there for centuries, and as history moves forward, others have lived there too. The forms change, the language shifts, but the underlying need remains: to make sense, to assign meaning, to endure uncertainty without surrendering to it. This is not a lesson delivered. It is an observation offered. And with that observation, the medieval world does not conclude. It simply becomes quiet, present, still. In that stillness, history no longer feels like a sequence of events. It feels like a presence. The medieval world lingers not through detail, but through mood, through the sense of lives lived without full explanation, yet carried forward all the same. Belief in this space is no longer something to examine closely. It becomes part of the background, like distant bells or wind through stone corridors. It reminds us that people have always lived with questions they could not answer, and that life did not wait for certainty. The Middle Ages endured by accepting this. Not fully, not comfortably, but sufficiently. Enough to wake each morning, to tend fields, to repeat rituals, to pass stories along. Enough to continue. Conspiracy thinking, stripped of drama, rests here as well. No longer accusation or fear, but orientation. A quiet assumption that events have causes, even if those causes remain unseen. That nothing happens without reason, even if the reason cannot be known. This assumption eased the weight of randomness. It offered shape where there was none, and shape, however fragile, was easier to carry than chaos. History does not ask us to adopt this assumption. It asks us to recognize why it mattered, When we do, the medieval past becomes less about difference and more about continuity. We see a long human effort to live meaningfully in an uncertain world. An effort that does not end with progress, but changes its form. As the narration slows, there is nothing left to resolve. No argument to conclude. Only the awareness that belief has always moved quietly beneath history's surface, guiding interpretation long before words are written down. The medieval world understood this instinctively, and perhaps that understanding is enough. Not an answer, not a conclusion, just a shared human condition, stretching across centuries, settling, remaining. At this point, the medieval world no longer speaks in explanations. It breathes. It exists as a low presence, like the echo of footsteps long gone, felt more than heard. Time moves differently here, not in dates or reigns, but in cycles. Light and dark, hunger and rest, fear and familiarity. Within these cycles, belief settles into place without effort. It does not argue. It does not persuade. It simply accompanies life as it is lived. For medieval people, this accompaniment was constant. They did not expect the world to be transparent. They expected it to be endured. Understanding was welcomed when it arrived, but it was not required for life to continue. This expectation shaped everything. It meant that unanswered questions could remain unanswered, that uncertainty could persist without collapse, that explanation could be partial and still sufficient. Conspiracy thinking, at its quietest, belonged here, not as accusation, not as panic, but as background sense. A feeling that the world had depth beyond what was visible, that forces operated out of sight, that events were connected, even when the connections were unclear. This feeling was not always fearful. Sometimes it was simply accepted, a way of acknowledging limits without resisting them. As the centuries moved on, new structures emerged. New languages of explanation formed. But the feeling did not disappear. It adapted. It found new expressions, new metaphors, new forms. History carries this adaptation forward, not loudly, but persistently. And so, as the medieval world fades further into distance, it does not vanish. It settles into the foundations of what followed. Its assumptions soften, blur, and merge with others, becoming harder to trace but no less influential. This is how belief survives, not through certainty, not through proof, but through quiet usefulness, through its ability to sit with uncertainty without demanding resolution. The Middle Ages mastered this posture out of necessity. They lived where answers were rare and questions unavoidable. Their beliefs reflect that reality with honesty, even when they trouble us. In listening to them now, slowly and without urgency, we are reminded that history is not only something we study, it is something we inherit. And in that inheritance, belief remains, unfinished, unresolved. Still, eventually, even reflection loosens its grip. What remains is not thought, but awareness. The medieval world, observed long enough, dissolves into a texture rather than a story. Stone walls, distant bells, a sense of watchfulness shaped by generations who learned to live without expecting certainty. In that texture, belief no longer needs definition. It is simply present, like weather, sometimes calm, sometimes threatening, always beyond control. Medieval people did not expect to master their world. They expected to endure it. Endurance shaped how meaning was assigned, how fear was managed, how explanation was accepted even when incomplete. This acceptance did not erase doubt. It made room for it, doubt existed quietly, alongside faith and suspicion, rarely articulated, rarely resolved. It lingered, as so much did without demand. History often privileges moments of clarity, but most lives are lived without them. The medieval world reminds us of this. Its people lived in a long in-between, where questions remained open and meaning provisional. Conspiracy thinking, at its most subtle, belonged to this in-between. It did not claim certainty. It suggested possibility. It hinted at depth beneath appearances. It offered a way to live with unanswered questions without surrendering to chaos. As the centuries drifted forward, this way of living did not disappear. It softened, changed language. It adopted new forms, but it remained recognizable to anyone who has ever searched for meaning when answers were scarce. And so the medieval past becomes less a period than a condition humans return to whenever the world feels opaque and control slips out of reach. In that sense, the Middle Ages never truly ended. They receded, leaving behind habits of thought, instincts of interpretation, and quiet expectations about how the world works when it cannot be fully known. Listening to that past for long enough, there is nothing left to extract. No conclusion to reach, only a shared stillness. A stillness in which belief rests, not proven, not dismissed, simply present. At the furthest edge of this history, there is no argument left to follow. There is only the sense of time passing without explanation, as it always has. The medieval world rests here, not as a lesson, but as a reminder. A reminder that most human life unfolds without resolution. That understanding arrives unevenly, if at all. That belief fills the spaces where knowledge cannot reach, not as an error, but as a companion. In this space, conspiracy thinking no longer appears as a theory. It appears as a posture toward the unknown, a way of standing in a world that refuses to be fully seen. It asks not for certainty, only for enough meaning to continue. The Middle Ages lived with this posture for centuries. They carried it quietly, passing it from one generation to the next, rarely naming it, rarely questioning it. It became part of how the world was approached. As history moved on, that posture did not vanish. It softened, adapted, and blended into new forms of explanation. But its outline remained. It still does. When uncertainty returns, belief returns with it. When explanation falters, meaning steps in. This is not a flaw of history. It is one of its constants. And so the medieval past does not close its eyes. It simply becomes still, present without insistence, waiting without expectation. There is nothing more it asks of us. Only that we notice, only that we listen, only that we allow history to be quiet. And in that quiet, the medieval world remains. Not speaking, not concluding, just there. Not an absence, but a companion. The medieval world settles into it the way people once settled into night, without expectation that everything would be seen or understood. Darkness was not a failure of light. It was simply part of the rhythm. Belief rested in that rhythm, no longer shaped by fear or urgency, but by familiarity. The world continued without explanation, and that continuation was enough. Life did not wait for certainty. It moved forward quietly, carrying meaning even when meaning could not be named. Here, history no longer teaches. It accompanies. The Middle Ages do not ask to be remembered in detail. They remain as a tone, a posture, a way of standing before the unknown without demanding that it speak back. And so nothing more is added. Nothing more is required. The story does not end. It fades, stays, rests. As the narrative stretches further into quiet, the medieval world becomes less a subject and more a condition. It exists not in dates or doctrines, but in a sustained way of being. A way of inhabiting uncertainty without demanding that it resolve itself. For medieval people, the unknown was not an interruption of life. It was its background. Crops failed without warning. Illness arrived without cause. Authority acted without explanation. Under such conditions, belief was not something added to reality. It was woven into it. Meaning did not appear suddenly. It accumulated slowly, through repetition, through shared memory, through the steady passing of days that required endurance more than understanding. Conspiracy thinking, in its most ordinary form, belonged to this accumulation. It was not dramatic. It was habitual. People did not wake each morning searching for hidden enemies, but they lived with the assumption that forces beyond sight shaped outcomes beyond control. This assumption influenced how they listened, how they remembered, and how they judged events long after they had passed. In this way, belief became temporal. It stretched across years rather than moments. A rumor heard once might be forgotten, but a suspicion reinforced by seasons of hardship would endure. Over time, endurance itself became validation. The medieval mind did not require constant proof. It required continuity. If an explanation persisted long enough to accompany life through difficulty, it earned its place. Accuracy mattered less than coherence. Truth was not isolated from usefulness. This perspective shaped how suffering was understood. Pain was not always something to be solved. Often, it was something to be interpreted. Interpretation offered a sense of orientation, even when relief was impossible. The absence of resolution did not paralyze medieval society. It structured it. Communities organized themselves around shared expectations rather than shared certainties. Agreement did not require clarity. It required participation. Belief functioned socially before it functioned intellectually. To share an explanation was to share belonging. To reject it was to risk isolation. Over time, belief hardened into custom, and custom into instinct. Instinct operates quietly. It does not announce itself. It guides reaction before thought intervenes. Medieval conspiracy thinking at its deepest level lived here in instinct rather than assertion. This is why it endured. Ideas that exist at the level of instinct are rarely confronted directly. They are felt rather than argued. They shape what seems plausible long before alternatives are considered. As centuries passed, this instinctive framework adapted. New knowledge arrived unevenly. New institutions formed slowly. But instinct does not disappear when knowledge expands. It recalibrates. The medieval world passed its instincts forward not through instruction, but through inheritance, through tone, through caution, through what was left unsaid. Belief survived not because it was defended, but because it was familiar. Familiarity is powerful. It does not persuade. It reassures. In a world where reassurance was scarce, this mattered. As historians, we often search for turning points, moments when old beliefs were replaced by new ones. But the medieval record suggests something quieter. Beliefs rarely vanished. They softened. They receded. They waited. Waiting is a skill learned through necessity. Medieval life demanded it. People waited for seasons, for harvests, for healing, for justice. Waiting shaped patience, and patience shaped belief. Conspiracy thinking fit this patience. It did not require immediacy. It did not demand action. It allowed uncertainty to exist without collapse. It provided an explanation that could remain dormant until needed. Dormant ideas are resilient. They do not exhaust themselves. They persist. This persistence explains why medieval belief systems cannot be neatly separated from what followed them. The end of the Middle Ages did not dissolve these frameworks. It redistributed them. New vocabularies emerged. New authorities claimed legitimacy. New explanations gained prominence. But beneath them, older instincts remained active, shaping reception and interpretation. History does not replace belief wholesale. It layers it. The medieval layer is thick, not because it was dominant, but because it lasted. It formed under conditions of extreme uncertainty and therefore adapted well to uncertainty wherever it reappeared. In studying this, we are reminded that belief is not merely a product of ignorance. It is a response to limitation. When the limits are severe, the response becomes durable. The medieval world lived with limits constantly. Physical limits, informational limits, institutional limits. Under such constraints, belief became infrastructure. It supported life where systems could not. It explained where knowledge could not, comforted where certainty could not. This does not absolve belief of harm, but it contextualizes it. Harm arose not from belief alone, but from belief pressed into crisis without restraint. Most of the time, belief simply existed, quietly, as background, as orientation, as something that allowed life to continue without demanding that the world become intelligible. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson the medieval past offers. Not an argument, not a warning, but an observation. That humans do not require full understanding in order to live. They require enough meaning to endure. The Middle Ages found that meaning where they could. They lived with it. They passed it on. And in doing so, they left behind not a solved past, but a comprehensible one. A past that does not conclude. A past that settles and remains. As the medieval world continues to rest within this quiet span of time, it becomes clear that belief did not operate as a system that needed constant reinforcement. It functioned more like a climate, something felt rather than examined, something that shaped behavior without requiring articulation. People lived within it the way they lived within weather, sometimes harsh, sometimes forgiving, always present. One adjusted to it rather than questioned it. To do otherwise would have required energy that most lives could not spare. Life in the Middle Ages demanded attention to survival. Fields needed tending. Animals needed care. Illness required endurance. Death required ritual. In this rhythm, belief did not compete for attention. It accompanied action. It explained enough to allow movement to continue. Conspiracy thinking in this context was rarely sharp or defined. It was diffuse. It existed as a sense that the world was layered, that causes were not always visible, that power did not always announce itself. These assumptions shaped interpretation without becoming doctrine. A failed harvest did not demand a full theory. It required a story sufficient to restore balance, a reason to accept loss and continue planting, a way to frame suffering without surrendering to despair. Belief provided that framing. Over time, repeated framings became expectations. Expectations became habits. Habits became culture. And culture, once established, guided thought without needing justification. This is why medieval belief systems appear resilient even in the face of contradiction. They were not maintained through debate. They were maintained through repetition, through living, through survival. To challenge them would have required not only evidence, but an alternative way of enduring uncertainty. Such alternatives were rare. Even when skepticism existed, it often remained private. Doubt did not always seek expression. Silence was safer than confrontation. Acceptance was often easier than isolation. As a result, belief did not need consensus to persist. It needed only enough shared understanding to function socially. Complete agreement was unnecessary. Familiarity was sufficient. This distinction matters. It explains why belief systems can appear stable even when individuals within them harbor doubts. The system persists because it organizes interaction, not because it convinces every mind. The medieval world was organized around shared assumptions more than shared conclusions. These assumptions guided behavior even when explanations varied. Conspiracy thinking was part of this shared assumption. It suggested that outcomes were not random, that intent mattered, that unseen forces shaped visible events. These ideas aligned with religious cosmology, social hierarchy, and lived experience. They felt intuitive. As centuries passed, intuition did not vanish. It adapted. New explanations layered themselves over older instincts, but rarely replaced them entirely. The medieval sense of hidden causation softened, transformed, and reappeared in different guises. History often treats such continuity as failure, but continuity is not stagnation. It is adaptation. It is the survival of cognitive tools that continue to serve a purpose. The medieval world refined these tools under extreme pressure. Scarcity sharpened them. Uncertainty hardened them. Time embedded them. When we observe medieval conspiracy thinking from a distance, it may appear excessive or misplaced. But viewed from within its environment, it appears functional. It answered the questions people were able to ask with the resources they had available. Why did this happen? Who benefits? What lies beneath appearances? These questions did not demand precise answers. They demanded orientation. They demanded a way forward. Belief provided that. It did not resolve uncertainty, contained it. This containment allowed life to proceed without collapse. It allowed grief to be born. It allowed fear to be shared rather than isolated. Shared fear is easier to endure than solitary confusion. The medieval world understood this instinctively, and so belief became communal. Stories circulated not to convince, but to connect, to affirm that others saw the same patterns, feared the same forces, and accepted the same limits. In this way, conspiracy thinking functioned less as explanation and more as cohesion. It bound people together through shared interpretation, even when that interpretation caused harm. History does not ask us to approve of this outcome. It asks us to understand it. Understanding begins by releasing the expectation that belief must be rational to be meaningful. Meaning does not require accuracy. It requires resonance. The medieval world resonated with explanations that reflected its structure. Hierarchical, moralized, opaque. Belief mirrored reality as it was experienced. This mirroring explains why such beliefs endured beyond their original context. They were not arbitrary. They were shaped by lived conditions. When those conditions reappear, when uncertainty increases, when authority becomes opaque, when information fragments, similar beliefs emerge again. Not because history repeats mechanically, but because human responses remain consistent under similar pressures. The Middle Ages demonstrate this consistency with unusual clarity. Their slower pace allows us to observe belief formation without distortion. We see ideas emerge, settle, and persist without needing to dramatize them. This slow observation reveals something essential. That belief is not an error waiting to be corrected. It is a response waiting to be contextualized. The medieval past offers that context generously. It does not rush us toward conclusions. It invites us to sit with uncertainty long enough to recognize its patterns. And in recognizing them, we gain insight not only into the past, but into the conditions that shape belief in any era. The medieval world does not insist on relevance. It offers continuity, a quiet continuity, one that remains available to anyone willing to listen slowly enough. And so the narrative continues, not forward, not backward, but outward, dissolving into the long human effort to live meaningfully without complete understanding. That effort has no final chapter. It does not conclude. It endures. As time stretches further, the medieval world begins to feel less like a distant era and more like a sustained state of mind. A way of moving through uncertainty without expecting mastery over it. This mindset was not taught explicitly. It was learned through exposure, through repetition, through living inside conditions that rarely offered clarity. Medieval people did not imagine themselves as inhabitants of a confusing world. Confusion implies an expectation of understanding that has failed. Instead, they accepted opacity as normal. The world was layered. Some things were visible, others were not. This layering was not frustrating. It was assumed. Belief emerged naturally within this assumption. It did not compete with knowledge, complemented it. Where knowledge reached its limits, belief continued the work of interpretation. It filled space rather than demanding resolution. This filling was often quiet. It did not require certainty to function. It required plausibility. An explanation did not need to be proven true. It needed to feel appropriate within the moral and social structure of the time. Appropriateness mattered more than accuracy. An explanation that aligned with shared values, hierarchies, and expectations felt trustworthy, even if evidence was absent. Conversely, an explanation that disrupted those structures felt suspect, regardless of its logic. Conspiracy thinking thrived within this framework because it respected existing assumptions. It did not challenge hierarchy. It reinforced it. It did not disrupt moral order, clarified it. It did not deny suffering. It explained it. In a world where authority was distant and communication limited, this mattered. People needed explanations that fit their lived reality. Abstract causes offered little comfort. Intentional causes did. Intent implies agency. Agency implies order. Order implies meaning. Even when that meaning was dark, it was preferable to randomness. The medieval relationship to chance was uneasy. Randomness suggested a world without structure, without moral coherence. Belief resisted this implication. It insisted that events followed patterns, even if those patterns were hidden. This insistence shaped how medieval people understood responsibility. Misfortune rarely existed without blame. Blame did not always lead to punishment, but it restored narrative balance. Someone somewhere had acted. Something had gone wrong. The alternative, that suffering occurred without reason, was more difficult to endure. This does not mean medieval people lacked compassion. It means they sought coherence. Compassion and coherence were not opposites. They often existed together, sometimes uneasily. Belief systems allowed people to mourn while still making sense of loss. They allowed grief to be framed rather than left unresolved. They provided rituals, stories, and explanations that integrated suffering into a larger narrative. Conspiracy thinking, when viewed through this lens, appears less as distortion and more as narrative repair. It attempted to mend the tear between expectation and experience. Expectation was shaped by faith, tradition, and memory. Experience frequently violated those expectations. Belief bridged the gap. Over time, these bridges became familiar paths. People crossed them without hesitation. They became part of how reality was navigated. As generations passed, belief was no longer experienced as an explanation imposed from above. It felt inherited, natural, self-evident. Self-evidence is powerful. It resists scrutiny because it does not appear constructed. It feels discovered rather than taught. Medieval belief systems achieved this status through longevity. Longevity confers legitimacy. An idea that has endured across generations acquires weight. It becomes difficult to distinguish between truth and tradition. Both feel equally real. This is why medieval conspiracy thinking persisted even as conditions changed. It had already embedded itself into cultural reflex. Reflex operates before reflection. As Europe moved gradually toward new forms of governance, commerce, and learning, these reflexes adapted. They did not vanish. They reoriented. New explanations arose, but older instincts influenced which ones felt credible. Belief did not disappear under the pressure of change. It negotiated with it. This negotiation shaped the transition out of the medieval world. It was not a clean break. It was an overlap. Old assumptions lived alongside new interpretations, sometimes in tension, sometimes in harmony. History records this overlap imperfectly. It notices revolutions more easily than continuities. But continuities do the quieter work of shaping behavior. Medieval belief systems did this work effectively. They did not aim for precision. They aimed for endurance. Endurance is often mistaken for stagnation, but endurance is adaptive. It allows life to continue under strain. It absorbs shocks without collapsing. The medieval world required this resilience. It developed belief systems that could survive famine, disease, war, and instability. Conspiracy thinking was one element of that resilience. It allowed people to orient themselves when explanation failed. It offered direction when clarity was unavailable. This does not excuse the harm that sometimes followed, but it explains the persistence. Belief did not endure because it was always right. It endured because it was often useful. Usefulness is not moral. It is practical. History asks us to recognize this distinction. When we do, medieval belief systems become legible. They reveal themselves not as relics of ignorance, but as artifacts of adaptation. The medieval world adapted to uncertainty with the tools it had. Those tools were shaped by its environment. They reflected its structures, its fears, its hopes. And in studying them slowly, without urgency, we come to see belief not as an enemy of understanding, but as one of its precursors. Understanding begins where belief ends, but belief begins where understanding cannot yet reach. The medieval world lived mostly in that space, and so the narrative continues, not toward resolution, but toward recognition. Recognition of how humans live with what they cannot fully explain. Recognition of how meaning is built from necessity rather than certainty. Recognition of continuity rather than closure. The medieval past does not demand an ending. It asks only to be held in mind long enough to be understood. And so it remains, quiet, persistent, unfinished. As the medieval world continues to unfold in this quiet span, it becomes evident that belief was not experienced as a separate layer laid over reality. It was reality as it was lived. People did not pause to distinguish where observation ended and interpretation began. The two were intertwined, reinforcing one another through habit and necessity. Daily life offered few opportunities to step outside this integration. The rhythms of work, prayer, obligation, and survival left little space for abstraction. Thought followed action rather than preceding it. Meaning was discovered after events, not before them. In this context, belief functioned retrospectively. It explained what had already occurred rather than predicting what would happen next. A harvest failed, a child fell ill, a journey ended in loss. Belief did not prevent these things. It followed them, offering a narrative that could absorb their impact. Conspiracy thinking belonged to this retrospective world. It rarely claimed foresight. It claimed recognition. It suggested that, in looking back, one could see intention where none had been visible before. This backward orientation made belief difficult to disprove. What had already happened could always be reinterpreted. Reinterpretation did not require malice. Often it required only memory. Memory reshaped events subtly, aligning them with explanations that felt coherent in hindsight. Over time, repeated reinterpretations solidified into shared accounts. Shared accounts became tradition. Tradition carried authority not because it was verified, but because it was inherited. To inherit a belief was to inherit belonging. Questioning it risked more than disagreement. It risked separation from the social fabric that sustained life. This social dimension of belief is essential. Medieval conspiracy thinking was not primarily intellectual. It was relational. It functioned within communities, binding people together through shared understanding of danger, responsibility, and meaning. When a group agreed on why something had happened, even tentatively, that agreement reduced tension. It allowed people to move forward together. Disagreement, by contrast, threatened cohesion. In a fragile environment, cohesion mattered more than precision. As a result, belief systems favored stability over accuracy. They privileged explanations that preserved order rather than challenged it. Conspiracy thinking often served this role by identifying causes without destabilizing hierarchy. Hidden enemies could be named without questioning the structure of authority itself. Misfortune could be blamed without requiring systemic change. In this way, belief protected existing arrangements while offering psychological relief. This protection was not always conscious. It emerged organically from the alignment between belief and structure. Explanations that fit the social order survived. Those that did not faded quietly. The medieval world thus cultivated a selective memory. It remembered what reinforced continuity and forgot what disrupted it. Belief played a central role in this selection. Over generations, this process shaped not only what people believed, but how they believed. The form of belief, its tone, its restraint, its patience, was as important as its content. Belief was not shouted. It was assumed. This assumption created a shared horizon of understanding. People operated within it without needing to articulate its boundaries. Only when something fell outside that horizon did it attract attention. Conspiracy thinking expanded that horizon just enough to accommodate uncertainty. It allowed people to imagine hidden causes without abandoning the familiar world. It extended explanation without requiring transformation. Transformation was costly. It demanded resources, coordination, and risk. Belief offered a cheaper alternative. Preserved meaning without demanding change. This does not mean medieval people were passive. They adapted constantly, but adaptation occurred within constraints. Belief helped define those constraints, marking what was thinkable and what was not. As time moved on, these constraints shifted. New forms of knowledge challenged old explanations. But challenges rarely erased belief entirely. They modified it. They forced it to adjust, to reinterpret itself in new terms. This adaptability is one reason medieval belief systems proved so resilient. They were not rigid doctrines. They were flexible frameworks. They could absorb contradiction by reassigning meaning rather than abandoning it. Contradiction became part of the narrative rather than its undoing. In this way, belief systems resembled living organisms more than static ideas. They grew, adapted, and survived by changing shape. Conspiracy thinking was one expression of this adaptability. It allowed belief to respond to new threats without dismantling old assumptions. It provided a way to integrate unfamiliar events into a familiar worldview. History often judges belief by its outcomes, but belief is better understood by its function. What did it allow people to do? What burdens did it lighten? What tensions did it resolve? For the medieval world, belief allowed endurance. It allowed continuity in the face of disruption. It allowed life to proceed when certainty was unavailable. This endurance left traces that persist beyond the medieval period. They appear in later traditions, later fears, later assumptions about how power operates and why suffering occurs. These traces are not exact replicas. They are echoes, softened, reshaped, but recognizable. Listening to them requires patience. They do not announce themselves loudly. They appear in tone, in emphasis, in what feels plausible rather than provable. The medieval past speaks most clearly in these subtleties. It does not instruct. It demonstrates. It shows how belief settles into everyday life. How it becomes background rather than foreground, how it shapes interpretation without demanding attention. And in seeing this, we gain insight into a fundamental aspect of human history, that belief is not an obstacle standing in the way of understanding. It is a bridge built when understanding cannot yet reach the other side. The medieval world crossed that bridge repeatedly. It crossed it quietly, without ceremony, because it had little choice. And as long as humans continue to face uncertainty, similar bridges will continue to be built. Not because the past insists on repeating itself, but because the conditions that shape belief are never fully left behind. And so the narrative continues, not forward toward a conclusion, but outward into a wider recognition of how humans have always lived with what they could not fully explain. A recognition that does not end, settles, and remains. As the medieval world stretches further into this quiet distance, it becomes apparent that belief was not experienced as something separate from daily judgment. It guided perception before conscious evaluation could intervene. People did not ask whether an explanation was true in the abstract. They asked whether it fit the world as they knew it. Fitness mattered. An explanation had to align with what was already familiar. The authority of the church, the hierarchy of society, the moral structure inherited from scripture and custom. Anything that conflicted with this framework felt unstable, even threatening. Conspiracy thinking fit easily within these expectations. It did not disrupt moral order. It reinforced it. It suggested that misfortune occurred not at random, but as a consequence of hidden intention or moral failure. In doing so, it preserved a sense of coherence. Coherence was essential. Without it, life felt exposed. The medieval world offered few safeguards against uncertainty. Law was uneven. Medicine was limited. Power was personal. Belief provided continuity where institutions could not. This continuity was subtle. It did not demand loyalty. It emerged through repetition. A story retold. A warning passed along. A pattern noticed after the fact. Over time, these fragments accumulated into something that felt self-evident. Self-evidence does not argue. It reassures. In the medieval world, reassurance was scarce. Survival required adaptation rather than confidence. People learned to live without expecting clarity. They learned to accept explanation when it arrived, even if incomplete. Belief thrived under these conditions. It did not promise certainty, promised orientation. It helped people locate themselves within a world that rarely offered clear boundaries. Conspiracy thinking offered a particular kind of orientation. It suggested depth. It implied that surface appearances were insufficient, that events had layers, that outcomes were shaped by forces not immediately visible. This implication resonated with lived experience. Medieval people knew that power often operated out of sight. Decisions were made in courts they would never enter. Knowledge was held by institutions they could not access. Authority was distant, and its motives were often unclear. To assume hidden causation was not unreasonable. It mirrored reality as it was experienced. Belief did not distort perception so much as reflect it. As a result, conspiracy explanations felt intuitive rather than exotic. They did not introduce new fears. They named existing ones. They gave language to suspicions already present in daily life. Over time, this language became familiar. Familiarity softened its edges. What once felt alarming became expected. Belief settled into routine. Routine is powerful. It does not demand attention. It shapes action quietly without announcing itself. Medieval belief systems operated largely at this level. This is why they appear so enduring in historical records. They were not dependent on charismatic figures or dramatic events. They persisted because they were embedded in ordinary life. Ordinary life does not change quickly. Even when conditions shifted, when trade expanded, when learning increased, when political structures evolved, belief did not disappear. It adjusted. It incorporated new elements while retaining familiar assumptions. This adaptability is central to understanding medieval belief. It was not rigid. It was elastic, could stretch without breaking, could reinterpret without abandoning itself. Conspiracy thinking benefited from this elasticity. It could absorb new information by reframing it. Contradiction did not destroy belief. It invited reinterpretation. An event that challenged expectation did not undermine the worldview. It deepened it. It confirmed that appearances were deceptive and that hidden forces were at work. In this way, belief protected itself from collapse. It did not require consistency. It required plausibility within a moral and social framework. History often emphasizes moments when belief systems were challenged or overturned. But the medieval record suggests something quieter. Beliefs rarely fell apart. They faded, shifted, or merged with others. This gradual transformation is harder to observe, but more influential. Belief systems shaped how people interpreted change itself. New ideas were not encountered in isolation. They were filtered through existing assumptions. Acceptance depended less on evidence than on compatibility. Compatibility was determined by structure. Did an explanation respect hierarchy? Did it align with moral expectations? Did it preserve a sense of order? Those that did survived. Those that did not struggle to take root. Conspiracy thinking often survived because it satisfied these conditions. It did not demand systemic change. It explained misfortune without questioning authority. It localized blame without destabilizing the broader framework. This does not mean belief was imposed from above. It emerged from interaction between lived experience and inherited structure. People recognized patterns that made sense to them and repeated them. Repetition is the engine of belief. It does not require conviction. It requires familiarity. As belief repeated itself across generations, it became less visible. People no longer noticed it as belief. It felt like common sense. Common sense is historically contingent, changes slowly, but while it lasts, it feels inevitable. The medieval world was shaped by a common sense that assumed hidden causation, moral significance, and intentional agency behind events. Conspiracy thinking was one expression of this common sense. Understanding this helps us move beyond caricature. Medieval people were not obsessed with hidden enemies. They were accustomed to a world in which power and causation were rarely transparent. Their beliefs reflected that reality. As we continue to listen to the medieval past, the urgency to evaluate fades. What remains is recognition. Recognition of how belief forms when clarity is scarce. Recognition of how meaning is constructed when explanation is limited. The Middle Ages show us belief not as spectacle, but as infrastructure, something that supports life quietly without drawing attention to itself. An infrastructure once built is difficult to remove. It shapes movement long after its origins are forgotten. This is the quiet endurance of medieval belief. It does not insist. It remains. And as long as uncertainty persists in human life, similar structures will continue to emerge. Not as repetitions of the past, but as variations on a familiar theme. The medieval world offers us that theme played slowly without emphasis. It does not conclude. It lingers. As this long meditation continues, the medieval world appears less as a chapter in history and more as a slow-moving current beneath it. A current that does not rush, does not resolve, and does not demand attention, yet quietly shapes everything above it. Belief within this current was never fixed in a single form. It flowed around obstacles, adapted to terrain, and reshaped itself in response to pressure. Medieval people did not think of belief as something to be defended. It was something to be lived with. Living with belief meant accepting contradiction without alarm. A person could acknowledge divine will while suspecting human interference. They could trust authority while fearing its secrecy. These positions were not experienced as conflicting. They were complementary. This capacity to hold multiple explanations at once was not confusion. It was pragmatism. The medieval world required it. Certainty was rare, but life continued regardless. Belief provided flexibility where logic alone could not. Conspiracy thinking operated within this flexibility. It did not need exclusivity. It did not require that all other explanations be rejected. It only needed space to exist alongside them. A plague could be both a divine trial and the result of hidden human action. A failed harvest could reflect moral decline and secret wrongdoing. These explanations did not compete. They layered. Layering is central to medieval thought. Reality was understood as stratified. Heaven above, earth below, forces moving unseen between them. Social hierarchy mirrored cosmic hierarchy. Visible order suggested invisible structure. Conspiracy thinking fit naturally into this worldview. It occupied the space between the visible and the hidden. It offered a way to think about causation without collapsing the layered structure of reality. This layered thinking reduced anxiety. It allowed people to accept that not everything could be known at once. Knowledge was partial by design. Mystery was not a flaw. It was a feature. Belief did not promise revelation. Promised orientation. Orientation mattered more than explanation. To know where one stood, even imperfectly, was more important than knowing precisely how events unfolded. Belief offered that position. Over time, this orientation became habitual. People learned where to look for meaning when events disrupted expectations. They learned which kinds of explanations felt appropriate and which felt unsettling. Appropriateness was learned socially. Children absorbed it through stories, warnings, and observation. Adults reinforced it through repetition and silence. Doubt, when present, often remained private. Silence played an important role in medieval belief. Not every thought was spoken. Not every question was pursued. Silence protected cohesion. It allowed belief to persist without confrontation. Conspiracy thinking benefited from this silence. It could exist without being tested openly. It did not require public affirmation. It lived in implication rather than declaration. Implication is powerful. It invites participation without demanding commitment. It allows belief to circulate quietly, adjusting itself to different listeners, different contexts. This quiet circulation made belief durable. It did not depend on authority enforcing it. It depended on familiarity sustaining it. As centuries passed, familiarity outlived circumstance. Even as medieval conditions changed, many underlying assumptions remained intact. New explanations were interpreted through old instincts. This is how belief travels across time, not as doctrine but as disposition. Disposition shapes response before thought intervenes. It influences what feels plausible, what feels threatening, what feels acceptable. Medieval belief shaped disposition deeply. Conspiracy thinking shaped a particular disposition toward power and causation. It encouraged attentiveness to what lay behind appearances. It normalized suspicion without requiring constant fear. Suspicion, in this context, was not paranoia. It was awareness, a recognition that decisions were often made beyond one's sight, that outcomes were shaped by forces beyond one's reach. This awareness was grounded in experience. Medieval people lived under authorities they rarely encountered directly. They experienced consequences without explanation. Suspicion mirrored reality. Belief did not invent this condition. It interpreted it. Interpretation softened its impact. It made power legible even if inaccurately. It transformed opaque systems into narratives that could be shared and remembered. Shared narratives reduced isolation. They created common ground. People did not have to face uncertainty alone. They could face it together, even if their understanding was incomplete. This communal aspect of belief is easy to overlook. Conspiracy thinking is often imagined as divisive. In the medieval world, it was frequently connective, created bonds through shared explanation. It reinforced identity through shared understanding of threat and meaning. It marked boundaries that defined community. Boundaries provided safety. In a fragile world, knowing where one belonged mattered. Belief helped draw those lines. This does not romanticize the past. Boundaries excluded as well as protected. Belief could justify harm as easily as it offered comfort. But its function was consistent, to impose order where none was visible. Order need not be just to be effective. It only needs to feel stabilizing. The medieval world relied on this stabilization. Without it, uncertainty would have overwhelmed daily life. Belief provided scaffolding for endurance. As historians, we trace the scaffolding not to endorse it, but to understand how it was built and why it lasted. Understanding requires patience. These systems did not operate dramatically. They operated quietly through habit, repetition, and expectation. They shaped how people listened to news, interpreted loss, and anticipated danger. They influenced reaction long before conscious judgment intervened. This is why medieval belief cannot be reduced to superstition or error. It was embedded in the cognitive environment of the time. The medieval past, when observed slowly, reveals belief not as interruption but as accommodation, a way of living with limits rather than denying them. As this narrative continues, it does not move toward resolution. It moves toward recognition. Recognition that belief arises where explanation cannot reach. Recognition that belief persists because it serves. Recognition that the medieval world lived deeply within this space. And so it remains available to us, not as a warning or a lesson, but as a record of human adaptation under uncertainty. A record that does not conclude. It settles. It waits. It endures. As this long reflection deepens, the medieval world reveals itself not through spectacle, but through persistence. What survives is not a catalog of beliefs, but a pattern of attention. A way of noticing the world that privileges implication over declaration, continuity over disruption. Medieval people lived inside systems that rarely explained themselves. Authority did not justify its decisions. Nature did not announce its intentions. Disease arrived without warning. Death followed without reason. In such an environment, explanation was not expected to be transparent. It was expected to be partial. Belief accepted this partiality. It did not insist on total understanding. It accepted fragments and assembled them into something usable. Meaning was not discovered whole. It was pieced together gradually from experience, memory, and inherited interpretation. Conspiracy thinking operated within this fragmentary logic. It did not claim access to complete truth. It suggested that truth existed somewhere beyond reach. That suggestion alone was often enough. It preserved the idea that the world was ordered, even if the order could not be seen. Seeing was not the standard by which belief was judged. Endurance was. If an explanation endured through hardship, it earned legitimacy. If it allowed people to continue without surrendering to despair, it remained in circulation. Accuracy was secondary to resilience. This emphasis on resilience shaped medieval intellectual life as much as popular belief. Scholastic debate, theological inquiry, and moral philosophy all operated within boundaries set by authority and tradition. New ideas were tested not only for coherence, but for compatibility. Compatibility determined survival. An explanation that fit within the moral and social architecture of the time could persist even if evidence was thin. One that disrupted that architecture struggled to find acceptance, regardless of its insight. Conspiracy thinking rarely disrupted. It reinforced. It explained misfortune without demanding reform. It located responsibility without challenging hierarchy. It offered clarity without upheaval. This made it attractive in a world where upheaval carried severe risk. Risk management shaped medieval cognition. Choices were made conservatively. Innovation was cautious. Belief favored continuity because continuity was safer than transformation. This conservatism did not prevent change. It slowed it, filtered it. It ensured that what survived did so gradually, with minimal rupture. Belief systems adapted accordingly. They did not fracture under pressure. They bent. They absorbed new elements and reinterpreted them within familiar frames. Conspiracy thinking was particularly adept at this absorption. Could accommodate new threats by reassigning meaning. A new disease, a new enemy, a new political failure could be integrated into existing narratives without requiring structural revision. This adaptability explains why conspiracy explanations rarely expired. They were not static claims. They were interpretive habits. Habits are difficult to unlearn. They operate below conscious scrutiny. They shape expectation rather than argument. Medieval belief systems functioned largely at this level. People did not debate whether hidden forces existed. They assumed it. The debate, when it occurred, concerned which forces, not whether the concept itself was valid. This assumption reflected lived experience. Power was hidden. Knowledge was restricted. Decisions were opaque. Suspicion mirrored reality. Belief did not invent a secretive world. It described one. As centuries passed and institutions grew more complex, this description did not lose relevance. It adjusted. New layers of bureaucracy, new forms of authority, and new channels of information preserved opacity even as they expanded access. Belief adapted to these changes by shifting emphasis rather than abandoning structure. The language evolved. The impulse remained. History often marks progress by the appearance of new explanations. But explanations do not replace instincts overnight. They compete with them. They negotiate space. The medieval instinct toward hidden causation retained influence because it continued to feel plausible. Plausibility is not static. It is shaped by experience. When people experience outcomes without understanding process, explanations that emphasize hidden agency feel natural. This was true in the medieval world. It remains true wherever complexity exceeds comprehension. The medieval period offers a clear view of this dynamic because its complexity was experienced directly and continuously. There were few buffers between cause and effect. When disaster struck, there was little institutional mediation. Belief stepped into that gap. It did not solve problems. A structured response. Structure matters. Without it, reaction becomes chaotic. Belief provided a framework that allowed people to act, mourn, accuse, forgive, or endure. Endurance was often the primary goal. In this sense, medieval belief systems were less about knowing and more about surviving. They answered not the question of what is true, but the question of how to live. Conspiracy thinking answered that question by offering orientation in a world that rarely explained itself. It allowed people to believe that events were connected, that actions had consequences, that suffering was not meaningless. Meaninglessness was the greater threat. The medieval world resisted meaninglessness through ritual, belief, and shared interpretation. Conspiracy thinking was one tool among many in this resistance. It should not be isolated from its context. It was not an aberration. It was a response shaped by necessity. As we continue to listen, the medieval past does not grow louder. It grows quieter. Its lessons are not asserted. They are implied. It shows us belief operating at the level of habit, environment, and expectation. It shows us how ideas persist not because they are defended, but because they are lived. This is why medieval belief systems continue to matter. Not as relics, but as examples of how humans navigate uncertainty when explanation is scarce. They demonstrate that belief is not simply about what people think. It is about how people continue, and that continuation, quiet and unresolved, stretches far beyond the Middle Ages. It stretches into every era that confronts complexity without clarity. And so the narrative does not end, settles again, into stillness, into patience, into recognition,